Well, this looks a bit flashier, doesn't it? Bit of a new system I'm working out. I figured out that there was a website that you could basically make your own football tactics with. Football Made Simple uses it. He's the YouTuber that inspired me to do this. I should have really known that there was a website where you could do this, and I didn't have to spend my days grafting everything on an image editing software to get it to look nowhere near as good as this. But alas, we live and we learn. Netherlands-France today, 0-0. It was a very poor game from an entertainment perspective, but doesn't mean there wasn't bits of tactical quality that you could admire from afar. You had to dig deep for it. I'm going to say that. In terms of the quality of games we've seen from this tournament, this was not up there. We've seen great pressing football, and these are two teams that generally don't press. They sit deep, they sit off, and try and frustrate the opposition that they're playing. And as a result, they almost just cancelled each other out, really. And I think both managers would take the point. And I know people would see this as negativity from both managers, and again, that probably has something to do and is slightly influenced by the amazing pressing football we've seen. I didn't think it was bad by both managers. There's this idea that France aren't looking great. They've got a 1-0 win against a very good Austria team, and they've got a 0-0 against Netherlands. I think that's a good performance so far. They'll beat Poland in the last game comfortably, and they'll get through to the next round. So I don't think there's anything really to worry about from a French perspective. It's not flashy, but it never really is with them. But we're going to go over the tactical perspective. This time, Netherlands on the ball first. Okay, so when Netherlands would build up, it would be in sort of a 2-4-1-3 shape. They'd build out slower from the back in terms of recycling it around the centre-backs and the goalkeeper to try and find openings. Xavi Simons would have a bit of a free roll in between the lines. Memphis Depay as the striker, Gakpo and Frimpong on the wings, and the midfield two showing deep for the ball. And France would go in a 4-1-4-1 shape. They wouldn't go to press the centre-backs and the players on the ball initially. They would only engage into press when there was a moment where it felt appropriate to do so. Let's say if Van Dijk in this position hits a slower back pass into Verbruggen, then Thuram would go into press, which would force him into a long reckless ball, or maybe force him along to De Vrij, where sometimes you'd also get Griezmann jumping into the press in this position. Very rarely, as France were quite passive in their press, but if he did, you'd either get one of two things: Tchouaméni jumping up into Schouten here, or you'd have Thuram dropping in as a result, covering the player that he left behind. And they did fairly well, to be fair, especially in that first half. Netherlands really didn't break out into any attack, and the few times it did happen was if they managed to find Reinders in a bit of space around Kante, where he could take the ball on the half turn and drive the ball forward. The only issue is he was working on the side that N'Golo Kante was on, and Kante squeezed into him quick. The rest of the midfield dropped in and reduced the space between themselves and the defence, so it didn't really feel like Reinders had many places to go. Try and find Simons in between the lines, but Tchouaméni stuck to him like glue. He was relentless in his pressing and in his man-marking phase. Or they'd look to try and go long from Van Dijk, let's say if the defence had squeezed up over here a little bit, and he would go long to Frimpong, who would be maintaining width on the right, who would then get the support of this guy, Denzel Dumfries, making an overlapping or an underlapping run for support. He was tracked by Rabiot though. And Rabiot, I will say, did a fantastic job on him. Defensively disciplined as anything. Never really felt like Dumfries and Frimpong were able to get their exchanges on that right-hand side well to create anything. And that was why Rabiot came into the game. I know people looked at it as slightly negative that when Mbappe couldn't play, Tchouaméni came into the team instead of another attacker. But this is why Rabiot was pushed over to this left-hand side and Tchouaméni given him the platform to go and do it. But then when Netherlands would push France back, this is how it would look. So then when Netherlands were in their main attacking phase, it would look like a sort of 2-3-2-3 shape. France would sit deep in their 4-4-2 passive phase, but just constricting that space in between the lines, where Xavi Simons, where Memphis Depay, where Reinders, who would push up into the half space, couldn't really get any joy in any space to create and attack that back line. Tchouaméni and Kante did a fantastic job. Kante is excellent, by the way. He's been one of the best players of the tournament so far. And Netherlands were fine with Van Dijk and De Vrij have it. They were blocking the pass and laying off into Schouten. Or sometimes you'd even get Reinders in this deeper phase and Schouten would push up a little bit. And that's because Reinders is a lot more comfortable taking the ball on the half turn and looking forward and passing it, whereas Schouten is more of a physical unit that can get on the end of anything late arriving into the box if the ball gets out into the wide areas. But typically it would look more like this, with Schouten pushed back and Reinders in the half space. Ake would drive the ball forward from this left-hand side position to try and create overloads on that side, but Dembélé would keep him well marshalled, to be fair. And again, on this other side, you'd get Denzel Dumfries trying to combine with Frimpong on this side. But again, Rabiot had him tracked brilliantly, covering this space, preventing that from being opened up, and these two couldn't really link up to hit France with their fast-paced and dynamic wing play to get balls into the box. And as a result, I think it ended up looking more like a sort of 3-2-5 in possession as the game went on, with De Vrij at right centre-back, Ake dropping back into the left centre-back position, Schouten and Reinders in between the line. It left a little bit of an imbalance on that left. It felt like Gakpo was quite isolated on this side. When the ball came over to him, if he wasn't creating a chance for himself by taking it inside and trying to put it into the far corner, which he only got the opportunity to do once off the top of my head, and it produced a good save from Maignan, he was fairly isolated. There wasn't really any support unless Reinders was making the late run from deep. And they typically tried to overload that right, but the defensive discipline of France really kept him from creating anything substantial. And it was a fantastic defensive display. Weren't there point in that regard. But we're going to go over the France attacking phase now to see how that differed. So France would build up in a sort of more 4-4-2, 4-5-1 shape when they typically build up on the right hand side, as they're known to do, with Tchouaméni dropping in to offer sort of a little bit of a lopsided rhombus, if you will. The build up rhombus, you don't really hear about that enough, do you? With the centre backs and Jules Koundé pushed a little bit further up. Rabiot would drop in, you'd have Kanté supporting as well in these areas, Dembélé high up on the right. Theo Hernandez would start pushing up to produce that left wing position that we know he's known for doing, with Griezmann pushing in as more of a support striker role with Thuram. Netherlands would press in a 4-4-2 that was a little bit passive. I didn't quite like them off the ball in France's build-up, as they try and squeeze them over to one side and press in these original phases. They weren't a pressing team, but this is the time they would. So let's just say if Upamecano had the ball here, you'd have Memphis going to press, you'd have Xavi Simons backing him up, Gakpo would close into Koundé, and it felt like Reinders and Schouten were constantly in between these three here, Tchouaméni, Rabiot and Kanté. It just felt like France always had a spare man to play it to in these areas that would end up having to force Netherlands back once this press was breaking, as Frimpong was tasked with looking after Theo Hernandez to making sure he didn't get an easy switch on this far side. So it felt like France could easily build up out of these situations, and sometimes you'd even get Tchouaméni dropping in, pushing Saliba back over to a back four, with either Kanté or Rabiot staggering to receive the ball. So it turned into almost like a 4-1-5 at points. In doing that, Kanté could get on the ball with the freedom of the space in between midfield and attack. Rabiot could move off of these guys here, and they didn't really cover it well enough, to be honest with you. Kanté could take the ball forward, and he's a decent ball carrier, Kanté. As much as his technical ability has been criticised at points, he is very capable with the ball at his feet. You'd even see Griezmann dropping in sometimes to help with the build-up, to try and outnumber that Netherlands press, as he's got the freedom to do so. He generally has a free role in the teams he plays in. So France could break out of this original build-up phase from Netherlands very easy, and so it pushed them further back, which we'll go over now. So as France pushed forward, you'd see Tchouaméni properly dropping into the back line to offer that number that they've lost in Theo Hernandez. Kanté and Rabiot would operate in between the lines as two sort of supporting midfielders / tens. Griezmann again dropping in to try and outnumber that Netherlands midfield, and their press was fairly passive. Memphis and Simons dropping off of that back two. You typically only see the midfield switch across in these instances if the player went over to this side. So let's say if they played it to Koundé, you'd have Gakpo pulling across here, Reinders covering into Kanté, and Schouten onto Rabiot. And if they did try and build up on the left-hand side, which wasn't as common, and getting it to Saliba, you'd see Schouten come across here, you'd see Reinders cover across here, and you'd see Gakpo follow suit and cover round. So it was just about trying to prevent that midfield from getting on the ball. You'd see Frimpong dropping in to make it a back five as Theo Hernandez would look to overlap, similar to what Rabiot was doing up the other end, and it allowed Denzel Dumfries to push into form more of a back three, which offered a lot more protection against France's attacking threat. And in these build-up areas where France had him pushed back and they were trying to build up to use Griezmann as that extra man, Dumfries had the freedom to follow him in and prevent him from getting on the ball and making a difference in these deeper areas, and he did it very, very effectively. As a result, France had to find different ways to attack, and they did that, and one of the ways was through Jules Koundé overlapping a lot more than he's generally used to doing. Typically he's the one that stays a bit more reserved, forms a sort of right-sided build-up phase for France, but he was getting forward a lot more, forming almost a bit of a right-wing position, allowing Dembélé to push into the half space, with Griezmann and Thuram as the strikers. Rabiot pushed into the left half space a little bit, and Kanté looking to provide the link between them all and use his energy to good effect. This pushed Gakpo back a bit, Reinders and Schouten dropping in a little bit more, and it meant that Simmons was pushed in a little bit more as well to try and provide that midfield from being outnumbered, and Kante getting on the ball and playing it through the lines. Rabiot and Dembele and Griezmann, the fluidity and the freedom that they had to link up in these areas really did catch Netherlands out. I know they get the idea that they're a bit of a boring team, France, but when this midfield are in full flow and their movement and the way they try and sort of create options around an opposition's midfield, it is pretty entertaining to watch at points. And because of Netherlands dropping so many players into the back line, they had a bit more freedom to do so. Kante showing great quality on the ball as well to create options, spread it wide, so they could really start to engage in a more intense attacking play. And to be fair, in that second half, Simmons would drop in and leave Memphis as the sole striker in these areas to try and prevent that midfield from becoming so outnumbered. So you'd see more of a sort of 4-1-4-1 shape, with Schouten dropping in a bit more. So Simmons could create that midfield three as a good solid base to prevent the build-up from happening, with Schouten protecting the players in between, just to prevent Netherlands from getting outnumbered in these areas and stop those overloads from happening, and just keep alert to wherever the player was that was moving into the most dangerous amount of space. And defensively well drilled, disciplined, and more than earned their points. So it was just two really good teams frustrating each other and cancelling each other out, as I was just saying. And full credit to both managers. Interesting game. And both stand themselves in good stead for the qualification into the last 16, where they both should be, and for the sake of the tournament, making it a better, more entertaining quality. Let me know what you think of the new layout here. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Cheers, lads. In a bit.